Have you ever wondered why two people can look at the exact same situation and see completely different things? Well, today we're diving into a really wild idea. What if your deepest values don't just shape your opinions, but actually predetermine how you see reality itself? And what if we could actually predict those perspectives with math? Okay, let's jump right in.
So let's start with something we can all relate to, an issue like ageism. Is it a problem of individual character? People just making bad, disrespectful choices? Or is it something bigger, a symptom of a flawed social system that's just baked into our culture? I mean, you've heard this debate a million times, right? And people on both sides are absolutely convinced they're right. The question is, why?
Well, it turns out the side you land on isn't random at all. It actually follows a hidden pattern, a kind of code that's tied directly to your, let's call it your core psychological operating system. And thanks to some incredible new global data, we're finally able to crack that code.
It all starts with this number, positive 0.1215. Now I know it might just look like a random decimal, some statistical noise, but it's not. Trust me, this one little data point is the key that unlocks the whole puzzle of why two people can look at the same problem and see two totally different causes.
So, what's the secret behind that number? Well, it represents the statistical link between holding what researchers call a blue value system. That's a worldview built on things like order, duty, and personal responsibility, and believing that interpersonal issues like ageism do not reflect broader social attitudes. In other words, the more you believe in a strong moral code and individual accountability, the more likely you are to see a problem like ageism as a failure of someone's personal character, not a product of the system. And what's so powerful here is getting the logic behind that blue perspective. This isn't about someone being naive or just ignoring reality. For this worldview, moral clarity is everything. The thinking is that when individuals act with integrity and follow the rules, society functions properly. Social change, then, doesn't start by critiquing the system, it starts with each person upholding their own virtue.
But of course, that blue view is just one way of seeing things. It's just one of several distinct psychological operating systems. And as we start to move across the spectrum of human values, you'll see that the perception of reality itself shifts dramatically.
And wow, this table just lays it all out so clearly. You can see a definite split. On one side, you have the blue and orange value systems. They're all about individual agency, rules, and achievement. And look, they both have a positive correlation with the belief that our personal interactions do not reflect bigger social forces. But then on the other side, you've got the green, yellow, and turquoise systems. These focus more on community, inclusion, and systemic thinking, and they show the exact opposite correlation. For them, our personal interactions are absolutely a reflection of the systemic biases all around us.
So let's bring this back to our ageism example, because this is where the rubber really meets the road. Through that individual virtue lens of the blue system, ageism is a personal moral failing. The solution? Uphold a clear code of conduct. But through the systemic forces lens of the yellow system, that exact same problem is seen as a symptom of cultural bias. The solution? You got to reform the institutional policies. So you see, same problem, but a completely different diagnosis and a completely different cure. All predictable based on those underlying values.
Okay, this is where it gets really cool. These predictable patterns aren't just interesting little facts for a trivia night. They are the actual engine for something way more powerful. A predictive model that can forecast how people will react to decisions before those decisions are even made.
This is the leap from just understanding psychology to actually predicting behavior. By feeding these statistical links into sophisticated models, you can take all this soft data about human values and start forecasting the hard outcomes of real-world decisions. It's really about using these correlations to calculate the invisible ripple effects of any action before you even take it.
And the logic is actually pretty straightforward. First, you profile a team to figure out its dominant value systems. Is this group mostly blue or maybe a mix of green and yellow? Second, you input whatever action you're proposing, like a new company policy. And then third, the model uses all that correlation data we just looked at to forecast the team's most likely psychological and behavioral response. It's basically predicting the future by understanding the present.
So, enough theory. Let's put this thing to the test. Let's run a quick simulation and see how a leader could use this model to handle that really tricky issue of ageism we started with, but for two completely different kinds of teams.
Okay, scenario 1. We're rolling out a new anti-ageism policy for a team that is mostly blue. The model predicts that if we frame the policy around individual virtue, using language like,
Upholding our code of conduct is a personal responsibility. The predicted outcome is high acceptance. Why? Because it's seen as a reinforcement of their core moral beliefs. The model gives this approach a big thumbs up, a positive score.
But now, what happens if we're dealing with a team that's mostly yellow and green? If we use that exact same message, it's probably going to fall flat. Instead, the model shows us we have to frame the policy around systemic forces. The message needs to be something like, we must address the systemic biases that enable ageism. And in this case, the predicted outcome is high engagement because the team sees it as a meaningful structural change. Again, a positive score. It's the same goal, but totally different paths to get there, all predictable from the very beginning.
So what does this all mean? What's the bottom line here? Well, it means our ability to lead, to communicate, and to solve problems together might be getting a serious upgrade.
The big takeaway isn't about deciding if the blue perspective is right and the green one is wrong, or vice versa. It's about realizing that different groups are operating in fundamentally different psychological realities. So effective communication isn't about finding one perfect message that works for everyone. It's about using the right map to navigate the territory you're actually in.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. Now that we can turn human psychology into a predictive science, are we gaining the tools to finally bridge our divides and actually overcome our biases? Or are we just learning how to create perfectly tailored messages that optimize our way around them without ever having to really change? That's something to think about.